Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, Dave and I will be going through the Bills roster position by position and establishing our roster locks. Guys who we feel have practically no shot of getting cut before the regular season. We will then use this list that we create today to help guide us as we make our way too early 53-man roster predictions next week. But first,
Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Bills Mafia, welcome into the Air Raid Hour presented to you by Picasso's Pizza and the Cover One Sports Network. Dave, tonight, one of our favorite shows of the offseason, because when we do this show, it means we're getting close to a nice little vacation for the two of us. And it also means that we are getting closer to Buffalo Bills training camp. The schedule released today. I believe it starts July 24th. I'd have to double check, but somewhere around there, late July, we are slowly but surely getting our way back to real football.
We're almost there. We're kind of past the midway point of June now. So we kind of start on that trek now towards training camp, which does start Wednesday, July 24th. The schedule released today, 9:45 a.m. practice time that day. Most of the practices during the training camp schedule are at 9:45. So it'll be interesting. I am not sure. There's as Greg Tomset would say, and maybe I do like this phrase. I used to hate it. A non-zero chance I might make my way up there for a day or two of training camp this year. We will see how the schedule works out for that. But yeah, it's that little break for us and then right into training camp. So we're kind of in that stretch right now where the page is about to turn, I feel like, towards football here soon.
All right. So as I stated in the opening, our objective tonight is to sort of go through position by position and debate who we think are roster locks and guys that we're going to keep sort of on the bubble. And those guys that we keep on the bubble, we're going to use those names next week as we do our 53-man roster projection show. So I went through and I did this exercise and I came out with 37 names that I felt confident calling roster locks. And there are some surprising names that I kind of left off the list because I think that maybe there is, while in all likelihood they probably will make the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster, you never know. There are other names on the depth chart, or the Buffalo Bills might decide to go thin at one position and deeper at another position. So I ended up my list with 37 guys. I don't know, Dave, if you're in the same range as me when it comes to roster locks.
Honestly, I thought when I was doing mine, I thought I was being a little conservative as well. But I ended up with 42. So I had 5 more than you did, but still double digits to go, obviously, to make the 53. There were a couple guys I kind of put in and we'll go through it tonight, kind of based on this year's draft, right? And so that may be where we're different, maybe not. But yeah, I had 42, so 5 more than you, but still what I thought was a fairly conservative a number overall.
All right, so let's get into it this evening. Let's start with the quarterback position. To me, this was pretty chalk. There are 3 choices to choose from: Josh Allen, Mitch Trubisky, Shane Buechele. I went with Josh Allen. I went with Mitch Trubisky. It was literally the Buffalo Bills who proposed the rule change this offseason to let the practice squad quarterback dress as the game day emergency third quarterback, and that rule change passed. So the Buffalo Bills can put Shane Buechele on their practice squad if he doesn't get claimed by another team at the end of training camp, and they can still dress him on game days if they need him. So to me, it's Josh Allen, it's Mitch Trubisky, and this rule change really ruined any shot Shane Buechele has of making the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster, sans an injury to someone like Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Although we'll talk about Shane Buechele in our minicamp recap show coming up for Thursday, and he's been playing well from what
Mhm.
it sounds like during training camp. So anyway, yes, I'm with you. Allen and Trubisky would be my two at the quarterback position that I would consider them both roster locks right now.
Then moving on to the running back position, there are a number of names to choose from: James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, and then there are some sleeper candidates: Frank Gore Jr. and Darrington Evans. I ended up with three on my list. I went with James Cook, Ray Davis, and Ty Johnson. Was I being too generous? What did you have as your roster locks at the running back position?
It was funny. I had three, but I kind of counted Reggie Gilliam in this group,
Ooh,
and
okay.
I actually have Reggie Gilliam as a roster lock. I just think the
Okay.
Bills can't shake Reggie Gilliam. I don't have Ty Johnson right now as a roster lock. Now, I think it's like an 80 to 90% chance that he does make the team,
Mhm.
especially because he does have that ability to return kicks. But if something happens, and I know it's a long shot, but Frank Gore Jr., he's been playing well in minicamp. It's like there's an outside chance that maybe he comes in and swoops in to take that last running back spot. So I guess I don't know if you have Gilliam as part of your tight end conversation, but I did not have Ty Johnson, at least right now, as a roster lock, although my roster lock thought process was like pretty much 100% chance, like
Mhm.
99% chance, I'll call it. So I'm leaving Ty Johnson off for now, although I do think there's like a greater than 80% chance that he will make the team.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had Ty Johnson as a roster lock myself, but hearing you say that, you're right. Like there is a chance that, Ty Johnson, you mentioned he's got that kick return flex. What if Darrington Evans comes in and like houses three kicks for touchdowns in the preseason with these new rules, right? What if Darren Evans comes out and he just really, pops off and has a good preseason? It was just 1 year ago that Darrington Evans and Ty Johnson were vying for some of the final roster spots on the Buffalo Bills team, and neither made the Buffalo
Mhm.
Bills 53-man roster. And obviously you have Frank Gore Jr. in there as well. So I'm with you. I actually had Reggie Gilliam off my list entirely because I just don't know. I guess we will know when we get to training camp, but this special teams rules, right? Is this going to be good for Reggie Gilliam? Is this going to be bad for Reggie Gilliam? I wasn't 100% sure. In all likelihood, it's probably good for Reggie Gilliam, but at the end of the day, it's a $433,000 dead cap hit, and it's $1.8 million in cap savings letting Reggie Gilliam go. So uh, personally, I think he might be a little bit more on the bubble, but I definitely see where you're coming from with Reggie Gilliam.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if you talk about the rule changes and you talk about sort of what Joe Brady's reading in between the lines and some of the things he said, I think it favors him slightly, but I could see
Mhm,
the cap space being something that the Bills might be interested in, although it feels like they've weathered the storm up to this point with the cap. And obviously they've got all the draft picks signed now with Coleman signing
mhm,
this past week, and they still have a little bit of breathing room. So maybe the cap space becomes less of an issue, but
mhm.
Brandon Beane's not been afraid to make those types of moves. So we'll see.
On to wide receiver now. We have Jessica Tennis coming in and saying, I personally think the Buffalo Bills keep 7 wide receivers this season, 2 dedicated strictly to special teams. And yeah, I mean, we're going to have a conversation on Thursday about minicamp and OTAs. And a name that I'm hearing a lot of is a guy like Brian Thompson, who he's catching a lot of balls, right? Including some from Josh Allen, not just guys like Shane Buechele. And if he can contribute on special teams, maybe he's like a surprise guy who could make this Buffalo Bills roster. But a lot
Mm.
of names to choose from here: Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Matt Collins, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Chase Claypool, Tyrell Shavers, Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, KJ Hamler, Brian Thompson, who I just mentioned, Xavier Johnson, and Lawrence Keys. I went with 5 roster locks at wide receiver. I went with Samuel, Shakir, Coleman, and then I think OTAs have really confirmed that Matt Collins, between the combination of special teams and all the reps he's getting with Josh Allen, I feel pretty comfortable calling him a roster lock, especially given Brandon Beane's comments about him as well, saying, well, he's never really played with a quarterback like Josh Allen. He's mentioned that in multiple interviews this offseason. And then if you look at Marquez Valdez-Scantling's contract, it's a $2.25 million dead cap hit if you cut him, and you literally save no money. The Buffalo Bills wanted MVS, and they paid him a lot of guaranteed money in order to get him to Buffalo. So I find it hard to believe, unless they pull an OJ Howard, that they would cut MVS. So my list is 5.
I have the same 5 for the exact reasons you mentioned. I think even before OTAs, Matt Collins, you could have probably put in as a lock, just the way that, yes, Brandon Beane had spoken about him even previous to OTAs, and just the personality of Matt Collins and his willingness to do anything and everything on the field. Like, the Bills lost a lot of blocking ability at the wide receiver position when Gabe Davis went out the door, right? And we know how much of a big play threat Gabe Davis was, but we did also need to talk about his ability to run block. Matt Collins is going to bring that to the table for this Bills team. And to me, it was those 4 before they signed MVS. And now with MVS, I do think, yes, it's those 5. So if Jessica's right, maybe there's 2 spots left, maybe for all those other players you mentioned. But if they keep 6, which they have done, there's only 1 spot potentially left. So yeah, I'll go with those 5 for now as the locks.
Yeah, because there's a lot of intriguing names that could possibly be fighting for 1, maybe 2 spots. I mean, you have Chase Claypool, who's looked really good in OTAs, but you expect a guy like Chase Claypool to look good in shorts. You have Tyrell Shavers, who, as our guy Burke likes to point out, was probably one of the better gunners in all of college football during his career in the NCAA. You have a former 5th-round pick in Justin Shorter, who has struggled apparently this offseason, dropped a couple of balls. Our guy Alex Brasky's been all over that one. And then you got guys who are catching passes from Josh Allen. So it's not exactly like they're running with Mitch Trubisky, or at least not fully with the Mitch Trubiskys of the world, in Andy Isabella and KJ Hamler. And I mentioned Brian Thomas as maybe a Thompson, as possibly a dark horse as well. So just a lot of options for the Buffalo Bills competing for 1, maybe 2 spots. And then hopefully they can get 2 of these guys onto the practice squad.
Yeah, I mean, it's like weird to almost realize how drastically different this wide receiver room is year to year, right? You're talking about, I mean, Khalil Shakir is the only real contributor returning, right, from a year ago, and he wasn't even like the top contributor. We're talking about just the wide receivers, not the tight ends, obviously. And so it is an evolution of this position group. And I think legitimately that these guys at the bottom fighting for that 6th or 7th spot, if they do keep 2, are going to get their fair shake, right? And all these different factors are going to be considered: special teams, how they're performing in OTA's training camp. Preseason is going to be big for these guys who can make the most of those reps, like we've always talked about. Having competent quarterbacks throw to them in these preseason games is really important. So expect Mitch Trubisky to get those reps for these guys. Big competition going to be in store for that last 1 or 2 spots.
So now we get into the tight end conversation, and these guys are going to be involved in the passing game a ton as well. Obviously, you have Dalton Kincaid, you have Dawson Knox. Then after that, we already discussed Reggie Gilliam, so I will skip past him as he is sort of labeled fullback. We talked about him with the running backs, but you have Quentin Morris, you have Trey McKitty, and you have Zach Davidson. I only felt comfortable putting 2 roster locks here, not counting Reggie Gilliam. I put Dalton Kincaid and I put Dawson Knox. I know there might be a temptation to put Quentin Morris here because he's been on the Buffalo Bills for so long, but I do look at a guy like Trey McKitty, a former 3rd-round pick, and think to myself, there is a realistic possibility that Trey McKitty could beat out a Quentin Morris in the preseason, just like last year. If he would have had a better training camp, I think the Buffalo Bills would have been comfortable, if he had won the battle and looked better in training camp, would have been comfortable cutting Quentin Morris and keeping Jay Sternberger. So Trey McKitty now has that opportunity, and I think this is a legitimate training camp battle.
It is, and I'm with you. I had the 2. Obviously, I had Gilliam in my running back group as well, but I'm with you. I think that Quentin Morris is another guy that kind of maybe falls into that Reggie Gilliam sort of conversation as far as like endearing to the team. They like what he brings. Obviously, he's a guy that's familiar with Josh Allen. He's been with the program for, a couple years now. But at the end of the day, this is going to be, again, a battle for maybe that last tight end position roster spot between a guy like McKitty and Quentin Morris. So I'm not ready to put Quentin Morris as a lock, but I will say that I feel like I'm probably going to put him into that same sort of
Mhm.
realm that I put Ty Johnson, where I think it's probably like 80% chance right now. If
Yep.
you tell me like who he's obviously going to have the upper hand going into training camp because of the experience with the team and being on the roster, but there is a chance that Trey McKitty shows well, as you mentioned, the former third round pick, and was pretty highly regarded coming out as a draft
Mhm.
prospect for his receiving chops. So um, not a lock, but I do think Quentin Morris has a good 75 to 80% chance to win that last tight end spot.
That brings us to the offensive line. I think the starters are chalk, right? Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, David Edwards, Osiris Torrance, Connor McGovern. You obviously, I think, have all 5 of those guys as roster locks, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I personally, and there are some 5th-round picks that the Buffalo Bills had this year that aren't on my roster locks list because of the position that they play, and they might get edged out if they don't show up in training camp and they don't just prove to have so much upside that they have to be kept, right? But I still think back to that Bills embedded video with Sean McDermott in the 4th round saying, this is Van Pran Granger, right? So when I look at Cedric Van Pran Granger, I don't really consider him like a 5th-round pick. I almost consider him like a 4th-round pick because I think that's what the Bills would have done if Ray Davis wasn't on the board. So I
Mm-hmm.
have SVPG, finally said that correctly, as a lock. Claude Puig has him as a lock. Who else do you have outside of the top 5 as your locks? I would assume SVPG is one, but I don't know
Yeah.
for sure until you tell me here.
Well, I did mention I had 42 and you only had 37. So we're going to see that I had a couple here probably adding my list that
Yeah.
maybe other people would not have as locks. But I'm going to tell you right now, looking at the depth here, looking at the time the Bills have invested in a couple of these guys and their development
Mhm.
and them being on the active roster the past season, along with SVPG, I'm going to go out and say right now that Ryan Vandemark and Alec Anderson are roster locks. I think I think 8 offensive linemen are already locked in. I think if the Bills do keep 10, there's maybe two spots open, whether it's
Mhm.
Lyle Collins, whether it's, Will Clapp or someone like that. But I think realistically, if they keep 9, there's one spot open, and it's going to come down to a battle between guys like Lyle Collins and maybe Travis Clayton, who's the 7th round pick. Like, it's probably going to be Lyle Collins. He's clearly not a roster lock by any means, but I do think because the general lack of depth behind what I will call the rosterable offensive line, that is kind of what's leading me to putting Vandemark and Anderson. I'm not trying to totally discount guys like Richard
Mhm.
Garage, right? But or Keaton Bills or Will Clapp, but like
Yeah.
to me, the investment and the time to develop these guys is kind of making me lean towards putting those other guys as locks as well.
I mean, to me, that is you are going a little bit of a limb there because that's 8 guys. So now, as you sort of mentioned, you have a ton of guys fighting for your 9 spot and your maybe 10 spot if you decide to keep 10 offensive linemen. I think both you and I have both been in agreement in the past. We would love for the Buffalo Bills to continue to keep 10 guys along the offensive line. It's something that sort of eats away at Brandon Beane. He kept Connor McDermott for how long? For how many years as sort of that 10th offensive lineman? He let guys like Wyatt Teller get away by trading them because he didn't want to keep extra offensive linemen. So I think going heavy at offensive line is certainly something that Brandon Beane will do, something he will consider. I think Aaron Cromer has invested a lot of time in Alec Anderson and Ryan Vandemark. I'm more of like the 90-95% chance they make the roster, but I will add them to the bottom ticker here. But now you look at it, you have these 2 vets, right? Will Clapp and you have Lyle Collins. The reports on Lyle Collins, and again, it's early. They're wearing shorts. It's not been great. Like I've heard a couple of OTA reports that he's sort of being cooked by guys like Von Miller around the edge for would-be sacks. And we know some of the issues the offensive
Well,
line
I
has
hope
had.
Von Miller is beating Lyle Collins. I mean, Jesus,
I
let's hope
it's
that's the case.
uh, to me, my one of my bold predictions for training camp is Lyle Collins will start at tackle. He will be quickly kicked inside, and then I think he's going to end up being like sort of the OJ Howard signing this year. I don't think Lyle Collins is going to make the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster. He's a
Wouldn't surprise me.
$1.5 million dead cap hit, and you save 80K. So you are eating quite a bit, but I think the Buffalo Bills wanted that insurance. But I think they're going to quickly realize that some of the younger guys they have on the roster, especially with the tutelage under Aaron Kromer, are ready to step into some of these roles. I think the biggest fear is right tackle, though, right? Because
Yes.
Ryan
Mhm.
Vandermark has always played left tackle, and he's played left tackle well. He has struggled on that right side. So that might be the hope for Lyle Collins. He might be the Jermaine Ifedi this year, right? He's the
Yeah.
ninth offensive lineman, but he's inactive every week unless Spencer Brown gets hurt.
Yep.
And then you also have Will Clapp, who could end up being like the Greg Manx of this group, right? Where he's cut 287K dead cap, you save 865K, and he's sort of like a veteran guy you keep on the practice squad. But there are other young guys like Richard Garage, who you mentioned, Tillin Grable, a draft pick, Kevin Jarvis, another guy who sort of incubated for a year on the practice squad. There are a number of younger players who could be fighting with a guy like Lyle Collins, with a guy like Will Clapp for this 9th, 10th offensive line spot. So it's going to be something really fun and interesting to keep an eye on for training camp.
Yeah, and like I just feel like that it I know it probably seems contradictory because I didn't have Ty Johnson as lock, but then I'm putting like two of these offensive linemen in.
Mhm.
But I just for those reasons that you like stated around the history of Brandon Beane with offensive line and having guys kind of slip out of the grasp, like Jack Anderson, like Wyatt Teller in trade, obviously, but um I don't feel like Brandon Beane wants to let multiple year players in the system go.
Yeah.
Uh, and look, that's not to say like they're not going to make the team, and that's why I'm putting them as locks. But maybe they're, maybe maybe it's not.
Mhm.
Maybe they're not. So we'll see.
John Robert comes in and says, I've heard Richard Garage is learning guard, even though he is a tackle. Yeah, Aaron Kromer likes to cross train his guys. Even Tommy Doyle was playing guard last year. And we've had these conversations in the past. And Eric Turner from the film room does a great job of talking about Aaron Kromer and just how he likes to cross train his guys, because if he has a guy playing right tackle, he not only wants that guy to understand the responsibilities of the right tackle, he wants that guy to have had reps at right guard, so he
Yep.
knows exactly what the right guard's supposed to be doing, so he can think two positions while playing one. So that's a really good point there. And maybe some of the guys who show that they can be versatile, like an Alec Anderson, are going to have that advantage come training camp and come roster cut down day. All right, before we get to the defense, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. So now we are moving on to the defense. And on the defensive side of the ball, we will start with the edge rusher position. A lot of names to choose from. I only personally have 3 set in stone. And the 3 I have set in stone: Von Miller for contractual reasons, and then Gregory Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. I was tempted to go Dwayne Smoot because we did give him 4 void years on his contract. However, I didn't, because you can still get out of that contract if Dwayne Smoot is outperformed. It's a $700K hit in 2024. It's a $1 million hit in 2025, and you save $750K by cutting Dwayne Smoot. So if a guy like Javon Solomon and a guy like Casey Toohill, or the combination of them and like Kingsley Jonathan, they really step up and outperform Dwayne Smoot, I can realistically see a world where he gets cut. So I went with the three of Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, but there are other options here. Dwayne Smoot, Javon Solomon, Kingsley Jonathan, Casey Toohill, Cameron Klein, some guy named Rondell Bothroyd, and David Ogwegbu. Dave, who do you have as your roster locks? Do you have more than three?
I have your three. I also had the same sort of internal debate about Dwayne Smoot, right? And so from a contract standpoint, you would look at that and you would say there's no way the Bills would not keep him. But when you think about it in the context of like what the Bills were dealing with in the cap this year and things opening up a bit for them next year, albeit the void years suck, but in reality, like you said, with the cap sort of becoming a little bit more friendly for them in the future, there is a chance that he does not make the team. So I wasn't ready to quite put Dwayne Smoot as a lock yet. However, I was willing to put Javon Solomon as a lock.
Okay.
And I realize that may kind of be a little bit premature. 5th round pick, obviously, it's not a super high pick, but it is a pick at a position where the Bills really need to get something more out of the pass rush for this year, whether it's just as a specialist or whether it's as a protege to Von Miller, while Von Miller's still here. And Javon Solomon, by all reports, has been flashed really well in minicamp, and the Bills need that pop from him. During that round, I was all in on either Mo Kamara or Javon Solomon. I did prefer Kamara, though I was happy with Solomon. I do think even as a 5th round pick, I'm willing to put him as a lock right now. I'm willing to put those 4 guys as a lock, with Smoot likely being the 5th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, if I were to make a prediction today, those would be my 5 edge rushers: Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Dwayne Smoot, and then Javon Solomon. I'm all about keeping all of those guys that we drafted through the 5th round. So while I didn't personally have that, I didn't have Javon Solomon on my roster lock list. And spoiler alert for one of the future position groups we get to, Ulafosio, I technically didn't have him on my roster lock list, even though I think it's like 90-95% chance they make it. But I do think back to, like, you have the Justin Shorters of the world, right? Where he wasn't going to make the football team. He was a 5th round pick last year. So they had him do the whole little injury thing, and then they put him on IR and stashed him. You have Voshan Joseph. You have Jake Fromm. Like, we've had guys who were drafted in the 5th round who just, it wasn't there in training camp, and it was pretty evident that it wasn't there in training camp. Sometimes you think you know what you're getting, and then when the guys put the pads on, you don't exactly get what you think you're getting. So
Right.
I wanted to leave myself a little bit of wiggle room, but I'm with you. The optimist in me, I will be mad. I will be unhappy if a guy like Javon Solomon, if a guy like Ulafosio don't make the 53-man roster, because I'm really all in on this Buffalo Bills youth movement. I'm really excited what they're doing. So in the bottom ticker, I will be adding Javon Solomon to this list. And then we will move on to the defensive interior. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, Dwayne Carter. To me, those 4 guys are locked. We've had conversations about the Deshaun Williams of the world. You also have Ilianku hanging around. You got Branson Dean. You got Gable Stevenson. What are your thoughts on the defensive interior?
I put 4 guys for now. Oliver, Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, and Dwayne Carter were my 4. I do think that there's a decent chance that Deshaun Williams makes the team. I don't know if the Bills will keep 10 defensive linemen. They might. They've done it in the past. They tend to go between 9 and 10. So, but I wasn't willing to put Deshaun Williams, obviously, as a lock. I am willing to put Austin Johnson as a lock just because of when they signed him in free agency. It seemed like he was also a really good fit. We talk about Eric doing film room breakdowns. He did a really good one on Austin Johnson in the fit in the free agent period of the offseason when we did our when he did those like special free agent previews. Austin Johnson was one of those, and when they signed him, it just seemed like a natural fit. So for me, in the interior, it's Oliver, it's Jones, it's Johnson, and it's Dwayne Carter.
All right. So on now to the linebacker position. And at linebacker, I only had 3 guys who I had as chalk. I had Matt Milano, I had Terrell Bernard, and I had last year's third-round pick, Dorian Williams. Now,
Hmm.
based on the conversations that we have had this preseason or this offseason, excuse me, we've talked very highly of Ulofoshio. We've talked very highly of Nicholas Morrow. We've talked very highly of Balon Spector. Me personally, I have all of these guys as bubbles, even though I think Morrow is going to make the team. I think Ulofoshio is ultimately going to make the team. And then I think the Buffalo Bills will keep 6 because of the special teams rules. And I think that 6 will be Balon Spector with a guy like Deion Jones going to the practice squad if they need him. But I think there could be a world where Deion Jones maybe beats out Nicholas Morrow and the Buffalo Bills take a $750K dead cap hit because Deion Jones beats out Nicholas Morrow. Or there is a world where Balon Spector plays so well that they cut one of these veterans, etc. So to me, personally, I wasn't willing to guarantee anything. But what did you put for the linebacker position?
Yeah, and just a quick check. I actually had 41, not 42. I miscounted the
Mhm.
first time, so it's 40. Going to be 41 for me. I have the 3 you mentioned. I do have Ulofoshio as a lock, kind of for the same reasons that I talked about with Javon Solomon. I think like his fit is undeniable. The reports of him kind of and like the style of defense that they run at Washington, sort of the fact that they watch the Bills tape, they watch Milano, they watch Bernard. This seemed like a pick that screams Bills. I think Olafosio is going to really endear himself to fans. Also, by the way, I think this group as a whole is maybe the best position group on the team, top to bottom.
Mhm.
If you get All Pro Matt Milano back and should have been All Pro Terrell Bernard together, obviously I think Dorian Williams is a lock, but I'm going to go ahead and put Olafosio as a lock as well. Wanted to put more guys, to be honest, but I'm gonna stop at 4 because you just never know with those bottom couple. They're gonna keep 6, they're gonna keep 5. It gets a little murky there. So I stopped at those 4, but I was willing to put Olafosio as a lock.
Yeah, I mean, pretty confident in this room. I really even like the 2 guys that we haven't even talked about, like Joe Andreessen, the University of Buffalo
Right.
linebacker who had a really good RAS score and previously at Bryant University. And then you have Shane Simon, who used to play for Notre Dame and then played his last season at Pitt. He was part of the Bills rookie minicamp. I really like the 2 of those guys to possibly battle it out for a practice squad job too. So I'm with you. I think this might be the strongest position group outside of quarterback, which is just the one guy that makes it the strongest position group on the team. And I'm really excited to see these linebackers this year. And by really excited, I mean, I hope I don't see any of them because I hope it's just Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard, and we don't have to worry about the depth of this linebacker position being tested this offseason. Onto the secondary now, the cornerback position. A
Mm.
lot of names to choose from. I went with 4 locks. I went Christian Benford. I went with Sewell Douglas. I went Teron Johnson. And I went with Kyer Elam, the former first round pick. That leaves guys like Jamarcus Ingram, Daquan Hardy, Kyron Brown, Kenny H. Lovely, and Takori Couch sort of off of my roster lock list. What did your cornerback lock list look like?
Yeah, so this is where I kind of maybe zag when people are expecting me to put Daquan Hardy as a lock. I didn't for now. I had the same
Mhm.
4 as you. I really wanted to put Daquan Hardy as a lock just because of his punt return ability, um, just his return ability in general. The fact that the Bills do need that backup slot now, so I would put him in kind of that same conversation as a Ty Johnson from earlier in the show, where I think he's like probably an 80% chance that he does make
Mhm.
it, but there's competition, right, for that backup slot. I think, what are the Bills gonna do with Cam Lewis? Kenny H. Lovely, as you mentioned, is playing well. Is it possible that he makes a run at that backup slot position? Don't know, but again, one of those situations where Hardy, I felt like is pretty pretty much has an inside track to a roster spot, but wasn't willing to put him quite as
Mhm.
a lock yet, so I went with the same 4 as you.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. Obviously, like to me, this is one of the position groups that lacks depth, right? Like right now, like if I had to make a guess, I'd say like Daquan Hardy's going to make the team, and then probably Jamarcus Ingram's going to make the team. But then again, like maybe a guy like Kenny H. Lovely has a shot to make the roster as a UDFA because of how shallow this position is. I know that Kyron Brown, Joe Biscaglia talked very, very highly of him towards the back end of training camp last year, and then he made the practice squad. So maybe Kyron Brown can give a guy like Jamarcus Ingram a run for his money. But this is also a position group where I can see a week or two into training camp, the Buffalo Bills going out and making a veteran addition as well. And that could throw a wrench into this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, you just never know like what might happen as they move guys around. And I mean, Jamarcus Ingram has his supporters, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Kenny H. Lovely's been playing well in mini camp. Like it's an interesting position group, right? Because and we'll talk about it on the minicamp show. Rasul Douglas mentioning like he didn't know he was on a like I don't believe that for a second, by the way. And this position group could be very much in flux come
Mhm.
2025. So if some of these guys, you know, play well and have been playing well in minicamp, play well in training camp, they could be a part of the future of this team beyond 2024. So this could even be more about a 2025 discussion than it is a 2024.
And I know we're going to be having a ton of conversation about Kyrie Elam on Thursday's show as well, because reports are looking pretty good with him in OTAs. It looks like maybe he's finally starting to flash a little bit of upside, show a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
that potential. So Kyrie Elam
Mm-hmm.
could be maybe putting his name in this cornerback competition. But on to safety now. At the safety position, I have 3 roster locks, and those 3 roster locks that I have, Taylor Rapp, Mike Edwards, and Cole Bishop. But there is plenty of competition and some names that maybe could be considered roster locks in DeMar Hamlin, who's had a pretty good OTA from some of the things that we've heard. Cam Lewis, who always manages to stick on this Buffalo Bills roster. Free agent D. Delaney and Kendall Williamson. What were your thoughts on the safety position?
Yeah, same 3 as you. For the reasons you mentioned, I think that again, there's a good chance Cam Lewis makes the team. I think maybe that last safety spot comes down to maybe him and DeMar Hamlin, right? We'll see
Mhm.
what happens with that. And DeMar Hamlin's another one of those guys who has been reported has been playing very well in minicamp and sort of as part of the OTA continuation of the OTAs
Mhm.
where he flashed as well, right? So it's a tough one, but like again, I'm trying to kind of separate emotion from the football, and for those reasons, I have the same 3 just as the locks as you.
That leaves us with special teams, and this is where it gets pretty interesting. Tyler Bass has had an up and down OTAs, but due to his contract, he's pretty much locked in at the kicker position. Reed Ferguson, he's got no competition. He's locked in at long snapper. There is one question mark on special teams, and only one of our core special team specialists really has any competition this offseason, and that is Sam Martin. Now, Sam Martin's contract, the Buffalo Bills allowed it to lock in, meaning it's a 400K dead cap hit, not just this year, but next year as well for Sam Martin, even though you would save $1.65 million if you were to cut him out of training camp. His competition is Jake Browning. And this might be the one UDFA, Jake Browning, who has a real opportunity to make this roster. So I am not going to make Sam Martin my roster lock. I'm only going with 2 specialists, Tyler Bass and Reed Ferguson thus far.
And I cannot in good conscience put Sam Martin on a roster lock list. Just it goes against everything I stand
Yeah.
for. And yeah, joking aside, those reasons you mentioned are
Yeah.
valid. I think the Bills will be willing to eat 400K dead cap the next 2 years. They've been willing to do that for other lesser players, or similar players.
Mhm.
And if Jake Browning has a strong training camp and importantly holds the ball well for Tyler Bass, then there is a very good chance that he can make the team. Sam Martin's probably the least. Um, Look, in a competition of 2 guys, it can be a coin.
Mhm.
It's a coin flip potentially versus a guy who's battling 7 other guys for 1 or 2 spots, right? Like maybe, a more important position. But in this situation, like the Bills don't really have
Mhm.
any real financial reason, even with the dead cap, to keep Sam Martin if Jake Browning truly outperforms him in camp.
Yeah, there are so many just signs pointing to Jake Browning making this Buffalo Bills 53-man roster. Tyler Bass had a good couple of days kicking early in OTAs, and the question was, well, who is his holder? And his holder early on was Jake Browning. Then he had his worst day of OTAs and he missed numerous kicks. And the question was asked, like, who was holding? And Alex Brasky came back from the Batavia Daily News and he said it was Sam Martin who was holding. So that's a strike against Tyler Bass. He had his worst kicking day of OTAs with Sam Martin as his holder. And then you have these new kickoff rules, right? Where you don't want Tyler Bass to sort of make himself open to some of these hits that a kicker might take. And Jake Browning was a kicker / punter at San Diego State. So he has the ability to do the kickoffs as well. So a lot of things going in Jake Browning's favor right now as a guy who could possibly make this football team.
Yeah, and let me sorry, I think we have Jake Brown. I think it's Jack Browning, actually.
Oh,
Jake Browning is the backup
the backup
quarterback for the Bengals, but it just like it's
just goes to
very
show you that punters don't matter. No one
yes.
cares.
So Jack Browning, I apologize to you, but there is a very similar named player who is at quarterback. So anyway, yes, I'm with you on.
John Robert comes in and says, with Jack Browning holding, Tyler Bass was 7 of 7. With Sam Martin holding, he was 3 of 8. So that was a pretty stark contrast that you see in the OTA. So that's quite a way for us to end it there with that little punter mishap, mispronouncing the name Jack Browning.
We botched the hold. We botched the hold there.
I guess we'll just have to start the show all over again and just erase this for everyone's memory. But final thoughts here, Dave, on the Buffalo Bills roster locks. Do you think we came in too high? Do you think we came in too low? To me, this is just one of those years where there's more competition than ever for spots on this Buffalo Bills roster, and that's just super exciting to me and scary at the same time.
It's exciting. I think we came in reasonable, right? I think we could have gone more. I think we could have gone less. Like, I think it's a good number to be around, that sort of hovering around that 40 number, right? I was at 41, a little over. You were at 37, a little under. That still leaves, for you, 16 spots up for grabs. That leaves 12 spots up for grabs for me when we do our 53-man projection, early pre-camp 53-man projection show right before our break next Monday. A lot of variability, right? And even between my 41 and your 37, I didn't have the same 37 as you plus 4. We had some variance in there, right? Like you had Ty Johnson, I did not. So there was certainly some variance in there. So between the two of us, we probably had a unique list of maybe about 42.
Yeah.
So it's lower than I'd say we would have had in years past, right? In years past, we probably would have come down to maybe like the last 4 or 5 spots as not being locks, but things are different this year, and it's exciting, scary at the same time. It is still a very talented and deep team. When you're talking about 40 guys that you can kind of already pencil in, that is good. But it is exciting as well to kind of see some new faces.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. We're going to be back at it Thursday night at 9 p.m. We have combed through all the various different interviews that were done with guys like Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich and Joe Brady and Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, you name it. We've gone through the beat reporters' reports on OTAs and who's been having good OTAs, who's been having bad OTAs, mini camps, etc. So we'll be breaking down and reviewing all of the Bills' 4 weeks of OTAs and mandatory mini camp on Thursday's show. And then we're going to be using what we did here today as a baseline next Monday to make our way to early 53-man roster projections. As Dave said, he's got 12 decisions to make. I've got 16 decisions to make based on our roster locks list on who the Buffalo Bills will be bringing in week 1 to Highmark Stadium to play the Arizona Cardinals. So thank you guys so much. You can find the audio version of this show every morning after. Just search Apple Podcasts, Spotify for Air Raid Buffalo Football. You can find us there in audio form, listen to us in the car, at work, etc. If you want to help us out, you can smash that like button, hit that little share button, and share with anyone you think would enjoy this Air Raid Hour program. And Dave, until next time, thank you guys so much, and go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!